Welcome to the Emergency Management and Preparedness Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities webinar series. I'm Louis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center, your moderator for this series. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Pacific ADA Center on behalf of the ADA National Network. The ADA National Network is made up of 10 regional centers that are federally funded to provide training, technical assistance, and other information as needed on the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can reach your regional ADA center by dialing 1-800-949-4232. Real-time captioning is provided for this webinar. The caption screen can be accessed by choosing the CC icon in the meeting control toolbar at the bottom of your screen. To toggle the meeting control toolbar permanently on, you can press the Alt key and then press it again. As always in our sessions, only the speakers will have audio. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, you can dial 1-669-900-9128 or 1-646-558-8656 and use the webinar ID of 845-3662-6656. Also want to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be able to be accessed at ADA Presentations in the archive section of Emergency Management next week. This is the 8th year of this webinar series, which shares issues and promising practices in emergency management, inclusive of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. The series topics cover emergency preparedness and disaster response, recovery and mitigation, as well as accessibility and reasonable accommodation issues under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, and other relevant laws. Upcoming sessions are available at adapresentations.org under the Schedule tab in the Emergency Management section. These monthly webinars occur on the second Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, 12:30 Mountain, and 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time. By being here, you are on the list to receive notices for future webinars in this series. The notices go out 2 to 3 weeks before the next webinar and open that webinar to registration. You can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation at the adapresentations.org webpage in the Schedule section. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. You may submit your questions using the chat area within the webinar platform. The speakers and I will address them at the end of the session, so feel free to submit them as they come to your mind during the presentation. To submit those questions, use the chat area text box. If you're using keystrokes, you can press Alt and H and enter your text in that chat area. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you can ask your questions by emailing them to adatech@adapacific.org. That's ADATECH@adapacific.org. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can send a private chat message to the host by typing in the chat window. Again, you can type that in their text box and hit enter, or you can use your keystrokes to use Alt H to open the chat box. You can also email any of those difficulties to adatech@adapacific.org, or you can call us at 510-285-5600. Today's ADA National Network learning session is titled, "What Did They Say? why effective communications is critical in emergency management. This webinar will review the importance of effective communication in emergency management. Using real-life examples and from the field, the speakers will address what effective communication means and how emergency managers can improve their public communication to make it effective to people with disabilities. Today's speakers are Aaron Kubey. Aaron is a certified deaf interpreter and communication access specialist with FEMA since 2017. He graduated with his master's in public administration with a focus on emergency management in 2020. Aaron is a strong believer in effective communication access, especially in emergency management. Gay Jones is a communications access specialist with FEMA. So I will now turn it over to you, Aaron and Gay. And Kevin, will you be speaking? So we can unmute you? Yes, okay. All right, Aaron and Gay, over to you. Gay, you are muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Gay.
I thought you were unmuting me. Okay, I'm sorry. I've known Lewis for a long time. So anyway, I work at FEMA headquarters, and I've been at the headquarters since 2011 in this capacity. Over the last couple of years, the last 5 years that I've been working with Aaron, we have come up with a lot of different ways to look at effective communication access. And that is our primary focus today, is to give you some practical solutions to being able to provide this to your customers in the field. Next slide, please. So, you know, I'm not going to go over the laws about effective communication. The ADA centers have done a really good job at that over the years. I've been involved with the ADA centers since 1990. I know they do an effective job of trying to train people on what the laws are, what they're expected to do. So, but when we talk about effective communication, we're talking about everything from written, spoken, and even alternative modes of communication that would allow people who do not effectively communicate to be able to talk to others and to communicate in their own mode. Next slide. So of course, what we're talking about is just about everybody, deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, cognitive, intellectual disabilities, lots of limited literacy, and those with limited English proficiency. Aaron is going to go through a lot of information on how to make language more accessible so that you can get the message out to the community better. Next slide, please. So most of you may already know that when we talk about communication access, we're talking about access and accommodation. We're talking about alternative format, conceptual plain language, and accessible messaging. The last two are things that Aaron and I and a lot of other people in the emergency management field have been working on for quite some time now. The accommodations, access, and alternative formats are kind of the traditional ways of looking at providing accommodations to folks. And so hopefully after today, you will see some other things that come into play that will give you some alternatives to what we traditionally think of as providing accommodation. Next slide, please. So, hold on a second. I'm trying to deal with the chat room on top of a. So what we're trying, FEMA as a whole, like any other federal agency, and is under Section 504 and 508 of 1970 of the Rehab Act of 1973, and we also apply all that to state and local for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so it's set up a little bit different, but the same principles are applied across the board. So when we talk about providing effective communication, we primarily look at two things, 504 and 508. And 504 not only talks about interpreting or captioning, but it's also talking about how we get that information out to people through video products and other alternatives to for people to get. And that includes foreign language and audio description. Audio description is a little bit, is fairly new in comparison to other things, but it really developing quickly on being able to provide that within a video if you need to. Not every video needs to be audio described, so we'll go through some of that a little bit. Next slide. Okay, this is the most important slide that we're going to talk about today. And for all of you out there, and the huge variety of experience, I think this picture alone speaks volume to what we're trying to do at FEMA. And so when we talk about equality, accommodation, and accessibility, we hope to move from equality to accessibility so that we can have more inclusive services, particularly at FEMA. Equality, we allow somebody into the classroom, but they may or may not be accommodated. They may not have access as everybody else does. Accommodation, in the second slide, okay, so you now have an accommodation and you may have the same, quote, access, but not really. It's an individual system and it's reactive. And the reactive part is that you have to have a process in place. People have to know about it, and then people have to respond to that process in order to get the accommodation. And for a lot of you on the phone call, like Aaron and I, and many people, not only at FEMA, but in federal government, that is, developing those processes can be rather difficult. And they change all the time because people change, technology changes, and so you don't always have a consistency in being able to provide an accommodation. And even if you do send out a message to say, if you need an accommodation, call such and such, doesn't get to everybody either. So we want to be more proactive, and instead of having a process, there's still processes, but it's more proactive way to ensure that people are getting the programs and services that they need. And so when we do that, as you can see in the first slide, you've actually made your program accessible so that instead of having to rely on a reactive way of getting an accommodation, you're actually providing that already. So what are we doing at FEMA is taking a more proactive stance to how we provide accommodation, how we provide access to people at FEMA. So that's the goal. And by providing accommodations and providing equal access into buildings and so forth, will allow us to be able to do that access piece. Aaron, do you have anything to add before I go on? I know you do.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much. I would like to add, and I really want to emphasize that accommodation and accessibilities, there is a big difference there. And it is important to keep them separate. With accommodation, that means we're going to provide the tools. That means interpreters, written language, etc. We're going to provide all of that. And that does not equate to accessibility. So we're going to, accommodations is the tools. Accessibility is we're going to make sure that everything works. So for that, we're going to make sure that we're getting the questions, that we respond appropriately, and that this is actually a conversation. So as we get the information, we'll share that with other people, and that's going to be the accommodation versus the accessibility. So if you go down to the next slide, please.
Can I add something? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to give you some examples of what we're doing at FEMA to provide access as opposed to accommodation. When we talk about providing access, we are asking people, for instance, when they apply for services and they register for services for a disaster, they need to provide us with their state relay service number that they've been provided if they've signed up for that service. And for all of you ADA folks out there, Title IV has been around. It's the premier telecommunications services. And so each state is required to provide that service within and along with that, like anything else, what happened in 1990 was the only thing that they had was, quote, the TTY. And today, they have a variety of services that have been developed because of technology changes. And because of that, we now have video relay service, we have captioning, we have TTY, we have online, we have all these variety of services, but they're all controlled by the FCC and through the states. And so when you sign up for one of those services, in most cases, you're provided a specific number for that service. And so what happens is if people would put that number down as their main number when they register for disaster assistance, that then allows that person to freely communicate with a FEMA person because the communication goes both ways. If you put that number down, the FEMA employee, the FEMA person will be able to call you back on that number and get direct access to captioning or an interpreter. And so you have that back and forth. That's access. We often think of something that FEMA has to do in providing a service that is access, but that's not necessarily true, that if you can provide that number to FEMA, then you'll have that back and forth conversation. So when we talk about technology, technology is driving a lot of how we communicate, and it is driving how people with disabilities communicate. And as we move from an analog system, which is what 711 and a TTY is, to the digital system, the TTY is not going to be there, and it has been replaced by RTT, or real-time text, which is available on any of your mobile phones. So I'm not going to get into detail about that, but as we move into more advanced technological advances, you're going to see a lot of federal agencies moving that way, and companies moving towards more inclusive types of communication. And one of the biggest things that's going on right now, not only at FEMA, but potentially other federal agencies, and definitely the FCC, is what we call direct video communication, or access to communication for everyone, or ACE. And if you go to the FCC and type in ACE, you will get to what we're talking about. That is a direct communication system where, in our case, if and when this developed, it's a long process. Deaf individuals will be hired at FEMA to become agents like hearing professionals, and they will be professionals just like anybody else. So anybody who uses ASL can go on the platform or the computer and communicate with a person directly and register for services, and communicate with somebody who communicates in ASL. Not only that, but we're also looking at the captioning part of it too, which would be separate because they're two separate pieces of technology. So as technology starts moving forward, one of the things that Aaron and I do is look at how those things fit into future technology needs for accessible communication. So with that, I'm going to send it over to Aaron and let him finish out the rest of the slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gay. Yeah, so from now on, I'm going to go ahead and be talking about the language and talking about accessibility. And you're going to be able to see in the slides. Sometimes you can see people really struggle with how to understand the information if it's sent out in print, if it's sent out in a newspaper or something else. The problem is a lot of times written information is written at a 12th grade level or higher. And many hearing people have about a 5th to 7th grade rating level, whereas deaf and hard of hearing individuals tend to have a 3rd or 4th grade level. That means, and also you have people who have a cognitive disability, etc. And so if you've got information being shared at a 12th grade level, that's not accessibility. You're actually missing out on the communication. And so we have to really be careful who we are writing for. In general, when you have something printed that you want to share with the public, you want to make sure that you're writing at a level that's going to match the people the information is being shared with. So you want to make sure that it's at an appropriate grade level for people to understand and access that information. Next slide, please. So as you can see right here, this is an example. You can see it says gravis, idio, pate, ratios, issue, linguum, aquae, kiss key obvious. And I'm sure you're all trying to think, what does that even mean? Next slide, please, if you can go down. Right here. That's why it's very important to use simple conceptual language so people can look at it and understand clearly exactly what's being said. Because we want to make sure that the average person can read that and understand. We want to make sure that it is equal to all people. We don't want people to look at it and have a misunderstanding. So you want to keep it simple and conceptual. That's going to equal accessibility, and then people can respond accordingly. Next slide, please. You want to keep it in plain, simple language. What that means is we're going to provide the information in the most simple and clear way to understand. If you use English or captionings, many deaf or hard of hearing people don't have the strong enough linguistic skills in English to understand. You have to understand that their language is ASL first. And so then they're going to have to constantly try and translate between the two languages. And it doesn't always work that way. So if you try and keep in mind how we can keep the information simple and clear and plain, then it will help for access and people will understand it better. And it's also continuing with that two-way access. If we can go down to the next slide, please. So when we talk about conceptual language, what does that mean? Keeping that simple language. So what that means, I really want to emphasize this. This doesn't mean you're dumbing down the information. That's not at all what we're saying. Keeping it simple as possible. That means that people can understand it. So that conceptual language means that you can take the simple language and then we can add on top of that as well. So I really want to emphasize, you want to keep it clear and concise and plain so people can look at it and understand. So you want to keep the concept of what's being said so people can imagine. It's like an imagination of the language. They understand what you're doing. They can get a clear picture in their mind. There's no ambiguity that's going to be there. So, sometimes, we keep the plain English, like if we're talking, one moment, please. So we want to keep the simple language, we want to keep that on one hand, and then we have the conceptual language as well. And we want to make sure that it's going to be a clear and easy communication.
And then we use peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So it's sort of like the plain language is the peanut butter and the conceptual language is the jelly.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So how do we make that happen? How do we keep that conceptual plain language? You're going to look at the information that you're trying to share, and also the context. We want to make sure that's very clear and it's easy to understand. We don't want the ambiguity. We don't want to be using huge, long words that maybe are not easy to understand. You want to focus on the point. And sometimes when you have that higher level language with the really large words, it's harder for people to understand. So if you keep it to more simple, basic language, then it's easier for people to understand and follow. Also, you can use a lot of repetition. Think back to like your second, third, fourth grade, when you're learning new vocabulary. That type of wording is what you want to use. And you also understand that there's a lot of repetition and you use the context to be able to develop the meaning for that and understand what's being said. Some words can have several different meanings. It can be interpreted in many different ways. So you want to avoid that if at all possible. So we want to avoid that confusion. Maybe you say one word thinking it means one thing and the person misunderstands and thinks it's meaning something else. You're going to lead to confusion. So you definitely want to keep it clear and concise so people can follow. Next slide, please. And so you can see what we're talking about here. So you're saying insurance will cover property that is in your policy. And the word cover, most people will look at that and think cover, like I'm going to put a blanket that's covering something, or I have paper that's going on top of something. That's not at all what we mean. So you want to try and say insurance will pay for the property that is listed in your policy. So cover, that's easy to lead to a misunderstanding. And that's how we want to make that conceptual language, so it's easier to understand. Next slide, please. And you can see two messages here on this slide. And you can kind of compare which one is more clear, which one is easier to understand, which is more conceptual language. So if you look at the first example there and read through that, you want to look at that, and we want to make it more general for people who will be able to understand it. So next slide, please. We've got many different examples here. Instead of signing them, you can just go ahead and read them. It says you and your family can recover from the emergency. There's many different. You can make sure that you're ready and you've got the preparations, and you can make those preparations today, and make sure everybody has their own unique needs when it comes to preparation. And you've got to make sure that you are ready for any type of an interpretation. Any type of an emergency, whether it's going to be a hurricane, weather changes, fires, earthquakes, etc. And you have to have your personal needs. You have to have your own personal emergency plan to meet what you need, and to make sure your family is prepared in the best possible way. So you want to talk about, for people with disabilities, how can they take care of themselves? How can they get that support? And it says what you can do as an individual to prepare for what you need during that emergency situation. So it's going to make more sense to more people. It's a mouthful. I know I said that, but that's just kind of example one that you can look at.
Next slide, please.
So this is example 2. How are you and your family preparing for this before something actually happens? We want to make sure that before it happens, you have everything for your own recovery. You're going to have your own needs. Everybody's going to be prepared. Everybody has their own different needs that are going to happen during the emergency, whether it be a fire, an earthquake, hurricane, or severe weather. So everybody needs to be prepared. And when you're aware of what your needs are and have that emergency preparation, you can make sure that everything is set for you when that happens. And people with disabilities are going to need different supports and different helps to make sure that they're prepared. And you can take that time to make sure prior to the event happening that all your special needs have been met. So now you can look at the two examples and you can see number 2 is more concise. It's more clear language. It's more conceptual language. It's more simple and to the point. With the first example, there's just a lot of words, a lot of big words, a lot of sentences going on, and it's easy to misunderstand the message or not have a clear message. Like I talked about with insurance, the word cover. So you can see that example number 2 is a better way to really make your point. Keep it brief and to the point.
Switching interpreters. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? So, how can you look at this conceptually and make these changes yourself? And take a look at this paragraph and see how you could apply plain language to it. The applicant will be the primary source of information regarding his circumstances for the purposes of determining eligibility and need. If the secretary needs to secure information from other sources, the secretary will ask the applicant to authorize the release of information. The secretary will inform the applicant of the kinds of information needed and the sources to be used. Okay, what can you do with that? Again, that's a lot, a lot of verbiage. So let me give you 15, 30 seconds to think about how you might make that and change that into plain language. Okay, next slide, please. First level answer. And I'm saying first level answer. This is actually from a federal website called plainlanguage.gov. And they made that change to the previous paragraph. And this is what they come up with. This is the plain language. So you'll see that you will be the primary source of information regarding your circumstances for the purposes of determining eligibility and need. If we need to secure information from other sources, we will ask you to authorize the release of information. We will inform you of the kinds of information needed and the source to be used. You will be the main point of contact for your disaster assistance application. Okay, so that's from the government website. And that's the government's version of plain language on that website. So next slide, please. So this is how I took that same verbiage, from plainlanguage.gov, and I added some more conceptual sort of language to that to make it even more plain, conceptual language. So you will be the main point of contact related to your application and eligibility. If we need more information from other agencies, we will ask you to authorize releasing your information from them to us. We will let you know what information we need from those agencies. So you can see that's it's more concise. And you notice, with the other examples, the people might not have understood the first one. And what do they mean by sources? What do you mean by disaster preparedness? All these things. So we've made these changes. Agencies, we give them some ideas. These are the places you can get information, organizations, for example. And I understand that concept more. It's more an understandable concept. So that's, much more concise and to the point. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're getting on to, we've dealt with some of the language issues. So when you're trying to make accessible materials for distribution, there's print, there's different modes of communication. So now we're going to get into accessible video and what do we need for accessible video. And so you have to think, what do you need? What are you providing? Who is it? This is going to be in American Sign Language, Puerto Rican Sign Language. There's different forms of sign language, international gestures, English, spoken Spanish. There are various languages that could be used. So who is your audience? And are you going to be speaking English or Spanish or whatever? And are you be captioning in English? Will you be captioning in Spanish? It's the whole thing. It's a package there. And so you have to add audio description, for example, or graphical, to make sure that that is accessible. And consider all of these factors. And, and who is your audience? Is it just the public in general? And often it's that, but it's not an internal audience, the general public. Or, what are you trying to convey with this message? And how are you disseminating it? Is it you putting it out on Facebook or other social media or Zoom or Twitter or, YouTube? And, you have to think of the means of distribution. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so you want to make an accessible video. So now what? So first, you have to ask, what's the purpose of making this video? What are you hoping to achieve with it? And then you might have your own library of accessible videos. And FEMA, we have our library of accessible videos that have been developed over 17 years or so. And I'm actually about 20, 70 to 20 years, I've just been with FEMA for a while, but we've been developing these things over time, and there's maybe 75 different movies, and we keep on adding to them as we go along. So take a look at what videos you already have, like evergreen what does that mean? We have to make sure that the movie is generally covers, it's not too specific and you need to use this film. We can use some of these materials again and again for, you know, any disaster, or some are specific to a particular kind of disaster. So if you have like a library of video materials, check that first. You know, maybe you have something that's appropriate for this context. There's no reason to make something all over again. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, right? So see what you got. And then work with the headquarter communication access specialists for your local organization or regional organization, and help determine if that video is actually needed. Can I have the next slide, please? So the key components to making an accessible video is whatever program, you know, whoever's responsible for that information, you have to partner with them to make sure the information is accurate, right? That's of primary importance, you know, because you don't want to make something and they say, no, that's not the right information. So so make sure you partner with the appropriate organization to make sure the content is accurate. And then you want to develop what we talked about, you know, it's the people, you know, consider their reading level, and are we going for the 3rd to 7th grade level, and to make sure that your script is in plain language so it would be accessible for that target audience. And then you want to encourage the use of deaf interpreters or sign language interpreters, and if you're working with a deaf audience, for example, you know, because they'll be more comfortable relating to who the message is coming from. And then you might want to have captions or voiceover or both. And you might have a spokesperson, for example, to narrate the video. And just to make sure that, you know, so like right now, you know, I'm the face of FEMA for the deaf community, more or less. You know, I'm trying to pull in some other people as well, so we can diversify who our representatives are. So we want to make sure that we can accommodate or match the different communities that we are serving. And next slide, please. So when you develop the accessible video script, you have to, again, think of who your audience is and what you're doing with it. And, you know, is it for grandma, or is it for young children, or is it for your neighbors? You know, write the script with that in mind. You know, it's at a conversational level. And you're trying to make, you know, simple points. So you write out the script, and again, you partner with the program to make sure that everything's accurate, conceptually correct, and you go through all that stuff, and it's, you know, appropriate to the context. And then, so when you have this script developed, and you might have a Microsoft Word doc, for example, and you can look through it, and then you can sign it in ASL and make sure that it should be about 3 minutes or so. It should take about 3 minutes to get the point across. You know, make sure it's concise. You know, maybe a half page could be, you know, 2 minutes or so. So take a look at it, and, you know, because people won't watch a video if it's overly long. If it's a 5-minute video, they're not gonna watch the whole thing. So just make sure that it's concise, to the point, and, you know, the goal is not to make too many points, you know, and you don't want to be too elaborate there. Next slide, please. Okay, now that this next point is you've added things, you've done the editing. At FEMA, we have YouTube, we make all of our YouTube stuff accessible, and you can look at all of the accessible movies or videos we have there, and then we disseminate those. We have our library and we, you know, try to see which people could benefit from this. And we have our preparedness plan, responsible for distributing these things. And we would include links and put it out on Facebook or, whatever social media that you might want to use. So it's all ready for distribution. And work that out with the people in your region, the regional organizations and the partners that you work with. This is very important. So whether it's flood or hurricane or, water safety, whatever it is. So these videos, have to be disseminated quickly through the appropriate media. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in a nutshell, I think that's pretty much it. We've had print accessibility, discussion of that, video accessibility, and I would like to welcome back Gay at this point. Gay, would you like to join in with us?
Gay, is there anything you would like to add? Any other information? Gay, you're on mute.
I think that when you're thinking about communications accessibility of anything, I think technology is going to be your driving force. The biggest issue that I find still after all these years that I've done this is money. And it's getting easier and easier to make accessibility happen. But I want people to think about how they can think outside the box, because we often get stuck on, well, I have this in-person interpreter at this meeting, whatever, and a lot of these meetings are becoming Zoom meetings like what we're talking about here. And I can honestly tell you from a user of captioning that these Zoom meetings are clearly more accessible than anything that I've used before. Adobe Connect, every technology platform that you see has different features and so forth. And Zoom and WebEx and Google and a lot of Teams are starting to add the automated captioning. Not great. I still struggle with, and I only use that if I'm talking one-on-one with somebody. I was using Teams this morning, and unfortunately, I need a new cord for my work computer because I have no audio on my computer. So I'm relying totally on the captioning, and it didn't go well because it just didn't caption that well. So, but I can remember starting out in assistive technology 30 years ago, everybody talked about voice recognition as being the greatest and best thing ever. And it's come a long way. And it's come a long way into being able to understand even my voice, which it couldn't before, but it's still not there. It's still not, and that would just take time. So when you think about communicating with somebody in your community, think about all of the platforms that you can use. Think about, how you can include an interpreter on those platforms, and captioning and so forth, because that's kind of the way things are going. And it's a lot more accessible than Adobe Connect, with, yes, it had captioning, but you had to be able to stream that captioning and so forth. But Adobe doesn't allow you to really insert an interpreter in there very well. So when we also talk about effective communication, we talk a lot about some of these other pieces that you wouldn't think that are part of effective communication. Because in 1990 and 1973, we didn't have the technology that we have now. And I think the ADA and Title IV has really done so much for people that are deaf, hard of hearing, and have speech disabilities that they, and that technology just keeps evolving, making it easier and easier for people to communicate back and forth, rather than putting onus on one or the other. So I wanted to add that because I didn't see that piece in terms of platforms and how many of us communicate now. So yeah, so my accessibility at work has improved 1,000% because of platform and the accessibility of platforms and the ability to include interpreters. And it takes a long time, and Aaron can say the same thing, it takes a long time for people within an agency to get to the point where we have been able to get with FEMA. Long ways to go, but anyway. Okay. I just saw a question from Donna Platt, and I really want to answer that one. That is what I was talking about in terms of ACE and DVC. That is the registration and helpline that, and the person that I am working with on that is on this call. And I have appreciated everything that she has done to this date, but there are, it's a little ways away because there's still a lot of hoops that we have to go through. So, but it will get there. So yeah, that's for you, Donna. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Aaron and Gay. Let me turn on my camera. And now's the best time for all of you who've been listening. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window. And I'm going to read them out to Aaron and Gay also, so that we get the questions into the captioning, and also to make sure that anybody who's looking in the archive gets to see what these questions are as well. Okay, so the first question, which was a little bit before you guys started really going into it, so it may or may not be connected to you or what you were saying, but the question is, will FEMA provide certified ASL interpreters to disaster shelters after a disaster, like a hurricane, for example?
I will answer that question. That is the disaster. That the American Red Cross or those providing the sheltering. That's not FEMA's responsibility. And they, work with the local Red Cross, and there's stuff going on in the American Red Cross that you should be able to work with them on that. But that's technically not FEMA's responsibility.
Okay, and so just if for the questioner or anyone else, if you don't understand what Gay is talking about here, there have been many of our webinars that have clarified the different responsibilities at the different levels, what the federal does, what the state does, what the local does, what American Red Cross or other nonprofits do. So go back into our archive and look at that if you need to sort of understand how that works. Okay. Next question, and I think, Gay, this one really speaks to your comment about the changes in technology. This person says, I'm part of a program where we partner with community-based organizations to disseminate emergency preparedness messages to their community members. We do this by sending out Slack messages and emails. How do we make this more accessible for our community organizations that communicate with our disabled population?
That's Aaron.
Yeah, let me quickly read the question. Hold on 1 second. Let me just look at this. Really, my response, maybe it's a little bit vague, you know, but it's going to be what matches, what works for you, what works for your community. I can't tell you what to do. You know, it's if you use Slack, maybe you use email, maybe you use text, maybe you use Zoom like this. There's so many different ways, but it's really important to match the needs of your community. Gay, do you want to add anything else?
Will you repeat the question, please?
Sure. I mean, let me add to what Aaron says.
Okay.
I think that part of what is there, our speakers may not know specifics about Slack and how to make that accessible. But I think what Aaron is saying is that if you work with your community and if you talk to your community and you find out what is going to be accessible for them, or what parts do you need to do, what accommodations, as we were using the terms before, or accessibility features do you need to have to make that accessible for them, that's going to be your answer. No one's going to be able to tell you any better than your community that you're working with. So, Gay, that's the question, was using Slack or email messages and how to make it more accessible for the community organizations to communicate with.
I'll be honest with you, I do not know what Slack is.
Yeah.
If somebody can tell me, I mean, I do not know what it is.
Aaron's explaining that Slack is a communication tool, like an email system that you can use.
Oh,
You remember before you had AOL
it
AIM?
automatically goes out.
Not really, it's not automatic. It's included, you have a different channel. So you can have different discussion groups where you'll be discussing specific topics.
Okay, okay. I get it now. Are you wanting to know how to make those accessible? The actual chat room accessible? You're gonna have to go to the company that developed that chat room to work with them on accessibility issues. That's not something that we do. That'd be like, I mean, we go to Google and say, hey, your captioning is really not that great. It is, but what can we do to make it better? Or, you know, Aaron and I work with FEMA folks on the FEMA app, and I would recommend all of you to download the FEMA app because it's brand new. There's a lot of accessibility features in there, and we've worked really hard to get that to that point. And we had a lot of users helping us to develop that app. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that we talk about are applicable to the disaster going on, because if you're sending out messages, they need to be accessible. If you're needing to provide an interpreter, you need to work with your local interpreter agency or your state deaf organizations and commissions and so forth. Every state is different. some don't have them, and get their input. It really is common sense. And I just find, like I said before, I think the biggest driver of the reason why a lot of these things don't get done is because of money. People saying that the money's not there. But we can budget for money. But I think it's just really important that what we're talking about today is we may not have all the answers to some of the things you're talking about, but if you want to know what the accessibility of Apple or Slack or any other technological piece, you need to go directly to that company and talk about the accessibility issues. What we do is we take those things and we put them to use within what we do. And it does change, then how we present it to the public changes also.
All right. I'm gonna say that the next question is gonna be very similar, which is how does Grammarly do in simplifying content? It's a little different because this is Aaron. This is when you were talking about simplifying the message. So I think the person wants to know this piece of software and how it does in sort of making a simplified message.
Personally, I've never really used that program, to be honest. Translation, like computer translation is something, and I try to, I grew up deaf, so I know how, I have a good understanding of how the deaf community reads things. I remember in the past, third or fourth grade level of grammar and how to do things and keep it in plain language. And I have a sense of how to do that. As I became older, I became better at grammar, and I went through this myself and developed my grammar and my language as I grew older. But I remember when I was in third grade, how I used to write things. It was like I would use,
when I was writing things, I'd use different examples to get my point across.
I'd use different examples to get my point across. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kay.
My daughter is also deaf, and she has used Grammarly a lot, and I don't find it real useful. And I certainly can tell you that it is not going to put your language down to a sixth grade level. What that does is just do standard grammar of what you've written. So it's not the same thing. That I would probably go to plainlanguage.gov and look at the information that they have. Aaron has then taken that information and used it, even though they may put things down to a sixth grade level. The issue is that conceptually it may still not make sense. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. So Grammarly is, I get frustrated with Grammarly, and I've had to deal with it for the last 12 years. So yeah, it's not the same.
Okay, and just to reiterate, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. And when you use Microsoft, a document, there is a program there that you can use to read there's an accessibility index that you can use, and it'll show you the grade level of your passage. I forget what it's called, but it's it's some kind of checker that they use, like that will give you some kind of estimation of the content and what grade level it's written at. And then if you notice that it's too high, go look at things again and try to tweak it and make sure that it accommodates your audience from if you're looking at a 3rd to 7th grade reading level.
Right. And how to do this will, is a whole other training that you might want to get to, the person who asked the question. And again, as you can see, even from Gay's answer, It's like the way you're going to learn the answer is to talk to people who are in the community and have, be able to respond to you to say, this, I don't understand what this is doing, and this is working or this is not working. So that's going to be your best way to go. Next question. Is there a glossary of words with more than one meaning? Now, I believe, Aaron, that this was back when you were talking about simplifying things and talking about messages that were, had the same meaning in two different worlds.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're using a glossary, I don't know. It's again, you need to know what you need to know in terms of the vocabulary. Like run, for example, the word run has so many different meanings of run in context. A machine can be running. You can run in a race or run to the office or, physically running, there are all kinds of different meanings of run, and it just depends on the context. And you have to add what sort of run to give the concept of that. So in that way, you can convey the meaning. So my example before was with cover, the word cover. And, we substituted the word to pay for that the insurance will cover, the insurance will pay for it, so it's not like covering. So we took it to a more specific level. So I go with my gut on this in terms of like how I deal with vocabulary like that.
I agree with Aaron. I grew up struggling with English also because of the, my hearing loss. But and like Aaron, I think my adulthood, I've learned how to write better. I probably write better now than I've ever in my whole life. So, but I also understand when I look at something, a sentence, that the difference is just English, and understanding why a person with a third grade reading level, and more so a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, because the instruction in school is so different than you've got to teach every single thing to somebody who doesn't hear well, so that they understand, conceptually what's being said. The biggest problem with somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing is that you say something and my daughter will look at me like, I have no idea what you're saying to me. And then I have to think, okay, conceptually, I've got to change how I sign something because it's just one word that I need to change. It's like pay for. For somebody who's hearing, cover for insurance is, but if you sign that, it's cover insurance. Well, that doesn't make any sense to anyone. So trying to look at those things, and it's not every sentence that you're talking about, but in the context of what you're trying to get somebody to understand, the more conceptual you can be, the better. And that's a big issue that we deal with in the field, and why so many people who have language issues, and I'm talking about literacy issues also, don't understand anything that FEMA is telling them. And with the exception of the legalese that we use, we can't change that. But we can certainly change what our letters look like, and Aaron's been heavily involved in that recently. So yeah, I mean, it's across the spectrum of trying to get it right for people who don't have a 12th grade education, a 12th grade reading level.
Go ahead, Aaron.
And then the other thing is I wanted to add in terms of and I keep on emphasizing this, of the idea of plain language when, you know, if somebody's in a third grade level, or, you know, it also applies to people with limited English proficiency or cognitive disabilities. And during an emergency, those people are really concerned. They're wondering, they're upset, they're afraid, there's a lot going on with these people, and their brains like spinning out on this, and they don't know what to do. And the people can get quite frantic. And also, that's another reason to keep things plain, you know, for even people who might normally understand it, you know, but if their mind is going through all these complicated kind of machinations and they're upset, really everybody can benefit from this plain language. So it actually helps the community at large, you know. They're trying to evacuate an area. There's been a disaster. They're depressed. They've lost somebody. They're losing things. Their mind, they're spinning out about this. So really, it's of help for everybody to keep the language plain.
All right, thank you. Now, the question that Gay answered earlier, just to read it in so everybody knows, she was asking, she was answering the question that's asked, any plan to have ASL helpline, not the disaster distress helpline, for those who apply for assistance? And Gay said they were working on it, just to make sure that we catch you up on what that one was. The next question.
I would just say one thing.
Yeah.
For anybody who understands what that disaster distress hotline is now, in terms of the technology that they use to connect with those interpreters, I mean, those mental health professionals, it's the same exact technology that we're looking at. And it will show you, you know, what that looks like in terms of when you call that distress hotline, that ASL hotline, you're directly connected to somebody who is deaf and a professional mental health. So that's that direct video communication piece. That's all I wanted. That's it.
Okay. The next question is, what do you think of the SAMHSA new disaster helpline?
Excuse me, can you repeat again? That's the SAMHSA new?
SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
So that's what we're just talking about. And we are involved with that working group to help develop that through direct communication in ASL. And with deaf and hard of hearing mental health professionals who can communicate in their first language. So we'll not be using an interpreter. People may be more comfortable using this with the direct communication in their first language. It's a natural language. They have a bond with people, and they're the people who can help them right away and refer them on to what to do. So I really support that for the deaf and hard of hearing people. That hotline is really good. We really want to get that going and advertise that, and for any kind of disaster that occurs, and really get that going. And that way the deaf and hard of hearing people would know that that is available, you know, and it also has to do, you know, mental health is priority at these times because people, you know, they need to know that they have support services available.
All right, next question is, I'm a health educator who trains healthcare and social service providers in health literacy. Related to accommodation, accessibility, and conceptual language, what are a few things you would want to share with those healthcare providers about how to best communicate with people who are deaf or hard of hearing? And before you guys answer, and you don't even need to answer if you don't want to, because this is about emergency management, but I do want to tell the person who wrote, we do have another webinar series on healthcare and the ADA. And just earlier this month, the very last one was about effective communication in healthcare. So you can go to adapresentations.org and go into the archive under healthcare and see that archive on that. It was a little bit more about the specifics of the ADA, as opposed to two people right here who are talking about practical uses of effective communication and different things that they're using. So they may have other things you want to add, but I think there's a lot of, you know, it's pretty much universal. You know, communication is communication is communication. But anyway, if you guys want to add something to it, you're welcome to.
Yeah, I would just add that there's a good referral to that previous presentation, but in general, with any kind of, verbiage or vocabulary, healthcare related things, emergency management, legal things, all of this stuff, it's all very complicated, and we have to admit it. It's hard to translate some of this stuff into plain language. It is not easy. So you have to recognize that, but it is doable. And the important thing is that we just have to try and emphasize, and hopefully you will remember, this will be what your carry away today is, how can we improve the language and make it more accessible for people in general, and also to match their reading level, and look at the language that we're trying to put out there, whether it's healthcare or legal or whatever it is, any kind of content. And we have to make that message, or think about, you're breaking, we have to think about how to get that message across. Yeah, and maybe we have to have healthcare, or maybe hopefully we would, you can do this yourself. And we're switching interpreters.
Okay. Next question. Have there been any legal issues or concerns when using plain, simple, concise language in lieu of legalese jargon?
Aaron, I guess, well, I'm going to re-explain kind of what I just said. In legal situations, sometimes you can't make that transition because it is a legal verbiage that you have to follow. Maybe you have to add more explanation to it. Say exactly what does this mean. You can try and abbreviate what you're saying, make it more concise. Gay, do you want to have anything you would like to add?
No, I
No?
think
Okay.
that we both have had enough experience with that, I think that most people, when they get letters from FEMA or anybody else, they want to know what to do. They're not, the least that they're going to do is read the legal stuff, but we can't change it.
All right. Next question. What is FEMA's policy on audio description?
Gay?
Well, I will tell you that it's like any other federal agency that we need to do that. Here's the issue, that when Aaron does a video at FEMA, it doesn't really require audio description because there's nothing in the background that is moving, or there's no action going on or anything. But if you're gonna, you need to, if you're gonna narrate something, and you've got something in the background, any federal agency will be required to do that. I would say that, at least for us, we were able to construct a contract in the last 6 months that included audio description. And also, when somebody is doing a contracted video, that language needs to be in there. So I think that there's still a lot of questions around which videos really need to be audio described. So that's a continuation.
Okay, well, we realize that many of you may still have questions for our speakers, and apologize if you did not get a chance to ask your questions. You have their contact information there on the screen. If you would like to send them a question as you think about it afterwards, they've given you their contact so that you can. If your question is about the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can ask that of one of your local regional ADA center, and you can reach us at 1-800-949-4232. You will receive an email with a link to an online session evaluation at the conclusion of this webinar. Please complete that evaluation for today's program, as we really value your input and want to make sure that our funder understands the value of this series. We want to thank Aaron and Gay today for sharing their time and knowledge with us. You can see all the excited comments coming through, and what a great presentation you guys did with us, and thank you so much. It was really excellent. And a reminder to everybody that this session will be recorded along with the transcript, and that will be available for viewing next week at adapresentations.org in the archive section of emergency management. Okay. We are going to be taking a break next month from our webinar series, as we will be hosting out here our Region 9 ADA Coordinator Summit. If you are an ADA coordinator or connected to your ADA coordinator, you may want to consider joining that, especially if you're in Region 9. You can find out more information on our website at adapacific.org. Other than that, thanks again, Aaron and Gay. Really appreciate all of your information today. Thank you all for attending and spending some time with us, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Bye-bye now.